Hey folks and Battletech fans, welcome back. I've wanted to explore this next topic for a while, but a recent Facebook post really cemented the idea for me to cover this topic. So I'm just going to jump right in. And that topic that's been explored on a couple of different Facebook forums is how do you pick a faction for your forces in Battletech? So I'm going to explore this from the perspective of the new or long lost returning player. I know that when you're getting into a new game as a newer player, you may not have all this information handy or even know where to start. So this is really primarily aimed at you. It's for everyone, and I invite the veterans to kind of chime in and give their perspective as well, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm really going to assume that you're a war gamer already, or at least know a little bit about war games, but BattleTech might be a little bit new to you. So suffice it to say, you're a brand new to BattleTech, or even if you're new to war games overall, I think this might still be relevant. But there's probably some air quotes preconceived notions that war gamers from other systems might have, bringing to the table when kind of thinking about, well, how do I pick a faction for my BattleTech forces in terms of like either how the rules of how they play or how they look on the table or things like that. And I hope this clears this up. So in particular, there's a influx of wargamers, particularly from Warhammer 40K, I believe, that are trying to get their bearings. So hopefully this video is also for you. And for context, I've played a lot of 40K back in the day. I played a lot of 5th and 6th edition. I played editions before that quite a bit, but I haven't really played since 7th edition. So, my knowledge is probably a little bit dated in the Warhammer community. But, and while I have nothing against 40K or GW or anything like that, I'm kind of more into smaller games or more niche games or games that don't require quite as many miniatures. And so, BattleTech really scratches an itch for me because it's got a lot of nostalgia. I like the big stompy robots. I don't have to have hundreds of miniatures to play my army. I can get on the tabletop pretty quickly and smash some robot face and have a great time doing it. But needless to say, coming back to BattleTech for me has been a great uptick in my hobby and kind of reinvigorated my wargaming mojo. So if you're from 40K and you're new, or you're from another wargaming system and you're new, welcome, and hopefully this will be insightful for you. And let me first also, before we get deep into this, I want to say that the BattleTech community has been incredibly welcoming to me as I've dived more into this aspect of hobby wargaming, and it's been as welcoming as possible. And by producing this list of videos that I've been doing, I hope you also feel welcome. New blood and new ideas are great, and if I can get some small part, if I can do my part to flatten the learning curve for you, I'm going to call that mission accomplished. And I'm going to break my advice into getting into a new faction into a couple different categories. Some of them may apply to you, some of them won't, and I'll also assume I've covered some or all of the different type of categories here in this video that some or all of them might be applicable to you. But I also don't assume that all of these things, this is the end all be all. So I also call upon you, the faithful and amazing veteran Battletech listeners, to do as you have done so many times before on my channel and in my videos, to provide your commentary and your insights. And it's just been fantastic and get to give your perspective. And I am not being hyperbolic at all when I say in my channel covers a lot of different kinds of war games and content. And by far, the Battletech videos have had the best engagement, the best commenters and fans, overall wildly positive and supportive, and really great additions to the commentary. And so I really appreciate you, the veteran wargamer and the veteran Battletech player, when you comment and support or challenge or give fresh perspective. It inspires me to make more content for all of you. So that being said, thank you for being part of this channel. I can't do this without you, and really so much thanks and support. And please jump in and add your points as well. So all that said, intro over, contexting over, let's jump in. So you're newish to BattleTech, and you love these awesome stompy death robots, and you're seeing, and you don't want to make a big mistake by picking the wrong faction or not knowing like what are your options in terms of picking a faction. So let's dive right in. So kind of piece of advice number one. You can't pick the wrong faction. And Battletech is kind of special in this regard, I think. Um, you can pick a faction in the lore, or you can make up your own and make up your own paint scheme or make up your own background. It doesn't matter. You can paint your Stompy Death robot machines however the hell you want. It won't change how they play on the table. And if your opponent cares that you painted your mechs in fuchsia or the wrong color of blue, or your scheme isn't perfectly represented because the gun barrels are the wrong shade of gray on the tabletop based on pictures that you see in books, then I think you need to find yourself some newer, better opponents. Now, that being said, I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek, but seriously, um, there's really, paint the way you paint your faction is really not of a major concern. I did a video earlier in my playlist. You should go check it out. It's called Faction Specific Rules. Battletech is unlike a lot of other war games in that there really is no faction specific rules. So say for instance you're coming from 40K, faction regret, quote unquote, can kind of be a real thing. Like if you paint your Space Marines like Imperial Fists, and this year's Imperial Fists Codex kind of sucks, your force is kind of invalidated in a way, or it isn't what you really wanted, or maybe not be the changes that you liked, and so you're kind of getting some regret for picking those Imperial Fists. Um, Battletech isn't like that. There's no faction-specific rules. So your force isn't invalidated if you quote-unquote pick the wrong factions. You won't be punished when new rules come out because there really just isn't such a thing in Battletech. So go ahead, pick your Eridani Light Horse, or pick your Korita faction, or pick your Steiner faction, or make up your own mercenary faction. Totally cool. You do you, boo. All good. A mech is a mech is a mech on the tabletop, and it really boils down to how you perceive them in the lore, how your opponent perceives them in lore, and to a lesser degree what the color schemes are for the common for that faction. So, like, look, man, if you want to paint your mechs like My Little Pony colors, rock out, man. You do you. So you can't really pick the wrong faction in terms of rules, right? So the next thing, the piece of advice I would get is, what time is it? Find yourself in time. And this is something that I sort of want to alleviate people. If people have started digging in, it's like, oh my God, there's different time zones or different time frames in Battletech. Which one do I pick? I want to allay some fears. Pick the most common one and you're all set. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So maybe you don't necessarily want to create your own mercenary faction, or you really don't know what faction to pick, but you've started digging into the lore and you know that there is a timeline in that lore. So that's fine. So at this point, it's probably good to talk about what is common and what is normal in the timeline in setting. So if you're brand new to Battletech, I would recommend going with a setting called, people will call it 3025, or they will call it post-succession wars, or they will call it pre-clan era. So what the heck does that mean? So unlike in 40K, Battletech is a continuously evolving timeline. 40K has started doing this in terms of advancing the timeline, I think a little bit. I think with Belisarius' call, they started kind of moving forward and doing the Primaris Marines. But again, don't quote me on that. I'm not a 40K aficionado. But I know that they're starting to kind of move the timeline forward. But in Battletech, that's kind of baked in from the beginning. And in Battletech, there are several eras, as the Battletech universe spans many, many centuries and thousands of worlds. So suffice it to say, the timeline is not static, and it covers many different time periods. Earlier time periods had awe-inspiring technologies that were just, frankly, miracles to behold. Then they went through this thing called the Succession Wars, where everyone was at war with each other. Everyone's getting destroyed. It's sort of like the in 40K when there was a lot of war and technology sort of got lost. And so that happened in Battletech too, where so much destruction and damage and destruction happened. Technology was lost. So in later time periods, a lot of that more awe-inspiring technology is gone, and mechs and forces are held together with more basic technology, not primitive, but more basic versions of that technology, forces used to scrounge their parts together and make sure that their battle mechs are still operational. They don't have the latest and greatest tech, but they do have stuff that's mass produced that works, but maybe is a little bit suboptimal. Later in time periods, you'll see a resurgence of new technologies. But the point is, long story short, if you start digging into the lore, you say, oh my God, do I do Succession Wars era? Do I do pre-clan era? Do I do Jihad era? Don't sweat it. Do what we call the 30-25 timeline. Nearly every mech that you could probably want, or every force, is common in that time period. It is sort of the de facto timeline for the introduction into Battletech. So most players that you're going to bump into, if you're going to do a pickup game, most players are going to be familiar with 30-25. They're probably going to play 30-25. That doesn't mean that other eras aren't played, but that's the right place to start. And you can pick just about any faction that you want that's going to be aligned with that time frame. So don't sweat. Big picture, bottom line, don't sweat timeline. If you're on the fence, just pick 30-25 and move on. I think you're going to be very happy and you're never going to be sad playing in that era. All right, the next thing that I would give advice about is do you, boo. Do your own thing. So Battletech has one thing in common with 40K, at least from a while ago. I don't know if this is still a thing, but back in my day, back when I played, you could 100% create your own Space Marine chapter. And in Battletech, you can do that. You can 100% create your own faction and paint it however the heck you want. Like if I made a custom Space Marine chapter with its own lore, backstory, and things that they could do kind of from a fluff perspective, not necessarily from a rules perspective, but a fluff perspective, that is totally encouraged in Battletech. Creativity is encouraged. 100% allowed to create your own factions and backstory. A lot of this usually manifests itself in terms of making your own what we call a mercenary company. So you see in Battletech there are major governments and military powers, and we'll go into that in a minute. That's not what I'm talking about right here. But if you're going to do what we call a mercenary company, you can paint that however you want. You can have their own backstory and flavor and historical characters. And remember, they don't have their own faction-specific rules, but you can make up your backstory and share that with your opponents and say this is what they do. Because there's no concept of codexes in Battletech, right? There's no faction-specific rules. Every unit, every mech is going to play the same for you versus another player. The only thing you can tweak is how skilled your pilot is, really. And so that kind of makes automatic play balance. So your mercenaries are going to be just as good as house military forces. They're just going to maybe look different. But in addition to formal governments and militaries, there are vast numbers of these mercenary companies that I talked about that are hired out by governments to do all sorts of both good and nasty jobs, and your imagination is the limit. The point is they're plentiful. They're fully supported by the universe, and the backstory is completely yours. So a lot of what players do is make up their own units and go as deep or as shallow as you want. Hell, you could paint all your mercs in the same unit color. Maybe the unit has pilots who paint their mechs all custom colors and they'll look completely different. You can do whatever you want there. Want a nameless mercenary company that's got jet black, paint scheme and has a complete mystery to everyone? Do it. You want a mercenary company that you create your own characters and deep backstory and have been around for centuries and are the baddest asses on this side of New Samarkand? Awesome. Do that. Want a mercenary unit that's kind of the official... Do you want a mercenary unit that's part of the official story setting and were sent in by the clans to spy on the Inner Sphere and have a character called Black Widow and are truly the baddest asses around? Well, there's that too. So there's things in the lore that are actually... mercenary companies that are kind of beholden to no one other than the almighty dollar, or what we call in the Battletech universe the C-bill, and you can totally do that. The point is, do your own thing. It's totally a thing that people do. Lots of people do it, and that really lets your creativity fly. You can do that. So the next piece of advice I would give is, hey man, I really like this one mech. What if that mech isn't in my faction? Well, the good news is specific mechs like cooties or taxes are available everywhere. Like they're everywhere. There's no mech that is only part of one faction. So certain mechs are usually known to be associated with certain factions, but that shouldn't limit you. So for example, the Jenner, if you're new to Battletech, look up the Jenner. You can go to a wiki called sarna.net and it'll tell you everything you ever wanted to know about the wiki or the Battletech universe. It's probably the best wiki around. The Jenner is a very fine mech, and it was originally introduced by House Korita, if I'm not mistaken. But just because it was originally built by House Korita doesn't mean that you can't use that in your mercenary company, whatever. Mech designs are stolen, confiscated, taken as war trophies, won in card games, salvaged, repaired, traded, sold, etc. all the time. So yes, some mechs are more associated with some factions than others, but there's no reason not to take your absolute favorite machine and put it in your force, even though it's not really created necessarily by your faction. Pick up the machines you like, either because you like the way they look, you like the way they play, you like the rules for them, it irritates your buddy, who knows, right? But take the mechs that you want to play. There's always a story or a reason you can come up with narratively to support why your mech is in your force. 100%. So the next piece of advice piece number 5. Hey man, I want to play Space France. How do I do that? And I'm doing that a little tongue-in-cheek here, but really, so you don't want to, let's say you don't want to be a mercenary, you don't want to be a pirate, you want your forces to be associated with some sort of formal military or official government or some other major faction within the universe. We got that covered too. So again, for ease and brevity, we're going to assume 30-25 timeline. I think that's very safe. During this time, there are what we call the 5 major houses, and also what we call the inner sphere. So what the heck did I just say? Think of it this way. The known galaxy that is the Battletech universe in 3025 is broken up into 5 major houses, which are large dynastic families in general, but those houses are essentially these galactic states. Each one of them has a defining characteristics and sort of things that they're known for. The inner sphere is basically the known civilized galaxy for all humanity in 3025. And that gets a bit more complicated when we start talking about the periphery. We'll more on that quickly or soon. And it gets really interesting when we start talking 3049 time frame and those pesky clanners starting to stick their nose into things that don't belong. But I digress. Let's just keep focused on how we get you to play Space France, right? So there's these 5 houses, right? So let's go over each one of these at a high level. If one of these sounds right up your alley, you should explore building and painting a force that is part of one of these houses. And here's a map of the inner sphere. So let's kind of give you a visual. Let's kind of talk about these one by one. Let's go over these at a very high level, wildly kind of oversimplified, and I apologize for that, but you just gotta kind of run with me on this. Like, I'm going to give you some details here that are very high level. I don't want you to think that this is the only things they are known for, but to kind of give you an intro or a flavor of like, what are these things and who are they and what do they do. Please don't assume the universe treats them as shallowly, characteristically as I am going to do here. I may eat my words here a little bit, but this is, like I said, super high level, intended to kind of gently push you down a rabbit hole of exploration for yourself. Okay, but I digress. All right, so like I said, there's no codexes like in 40K for these houses. This is literally just kind of purely for background, flavor, and motivation, and the type of mentality your force might exhibit while playing the game. So let's take a look at this map. First up, we have Housesteiner, also known as the Lyran Commonwealth. They're precariously poised between House Merrick and House Korita, and don't worry, we're going to go over each one of these in turn. And Housesteiner, also known as the Lyran Commonwealth, is fighting a desperate battle to protect their worlds, and they're precariously positioned between House Korita and Merrick. They're one of the 5 successor states of the fallen Star League. Like one time they were part of this conglomerate of nations called the Star Leagues that were kind of a mutual defense treaty, but that all fell to shit, and they sort of started squabbling with each other, and now it's endless war between these 5 factions and others. But anyways, they're one of the 5 major states, and they're noted for having the strongest economy, probably the weakest military leadership of all the different realms. So, wow, that seems odd. What do you mean by that? We'll get into that in a minute. Nevertheless, the symbol of this faction is the clenched fist in defiance to all those who would swallow up the Lyran Commonwealth. Housesteiner is commonly considered largely of European and sort of German descent. That doesn't mean that there's only Germanic peoples in there, but that's kind of generally what they're known for. They're also known for their strong abilities as merchant, and they are insanely wealthy. The Lyran Commonwealth has vast sums of wealth. And they're known for fielding some of the biggest and baddest battle mechs because they can. They can afford them. They don't always necessarily know how to use them to the best military and technical advantage, but they really are able to afford them. They're able to use them, and maybe not necessarily to their best advantage, but they're able to actually afford them and use them. They're known for a bit of nepotism when it comes to the highest ranks of society and military. Their house symbol, like I said again, is the clenched fist. Its capital world is the world called Tharkad. And I guess to summarize, if you like the idea of being a state that has the most wealth, best merchant class, has a little bit of a strong rebellious streak, and kind of middle finger to their neighbor, often winning by sheer willpower versus tactical know-how, Steiner might be the house for you. So let's go to our next faction, to the Galactic East. Yeah, I got that right. Galactic East. Next up is House Korita, or the Draconis Combine. House Korita is the ruling family for the fearsome Draconis Combine. House Korita has dominated the Draconis Combine since its founding in 2319. The Draconis Combine have a strong Japanese cultural origin. They are ruled with an iron fist by a leader entitled the Coordinator. They have both a strict military and social codes, and they claim unabashedly that their right to rule all of the inner sphere is inherent and manifest, and in many ways they are feared across the galaxy. They do style themselves after a Japanese tradition of Bushido and adherence to a code of honor, in theory, if not in practice. However, their leadership is often viewed as ruthless, if not treacherous, and they have often behaved with guile and subterfuge to meet their desired goals. They tend to favor red and black unit colors, although not always, and have a striking serpent as their house icon. They are most noted for honor in battle, for the most part, depending on who you talk to, having a death to all mercenaries mindset as well as a death before dishonor virtue. The capital world of the Draconis Combine is Luthien. If you think space samurai or space ninja, you're not too far from the truth. So that's House Korita. If that seems interesting to you, go dig up into Sarna. Go dig up into other sources of information and kind of go down that rabbit hole. Next up on our list of major factions within the universe is called the Federated Sons, or House Davian. These folks are known as House Davian, as that is their ruling family. If social standing is important in the Lyran Commonwealth, which it is, House Davian has taken that to an extreme, and it's almost a monarchy. The Federated Sons traces its origins to French and English nobility on Terra. The Federated Sons has a deep divide with their neighbor to the north, the Draconis Combine, and indeed a long rivalry resulted in several wars between them. Additionally, much of the Federated Sons' prosperity can be attributed to spoils taken from their neighbors to the west as well, the Capelan Confederation. Even though the Federated Sons is the largest state by size, it has the drawback of being very spread out, and there is a bit hard to support being so spread out, so therefore suffers a little in terms of total riches. So it can't really compete with Housesteiner on that. On the surface, House Davian to the outside worlds appears to have citizens with the most freedoms that are often denied in other cultures. Korita, Capelan Confederation. But if you look deeper, the stratification of their society, into something, it's more of socioeconomic classes, and honestly, there's a bit of stratification there. So it's not quite as freedom infused as they might like to think for themselves. In a lot of cases, they sort of have a sense of moral superiority and elitism as based on their ideals. That's part of their societal construct. The Federated Sun's crest is a sword over a blazing sun. Their capital system is New Avalon. So if you're thinking kind of space French who try to do the right thing but probably aren't as wonderful as they think they are, you're probably on the right track. And I think this is a good point to a good time to sort of point out there's no real good guys in Battletech. Sometimes they're better than others, but I think particularly the great houses, they're all kind of looking for the angle to come out on top. All right. So to the west of the Federated Sons is the Capelan Confederation. The Capelan Confederation is the smallest and youngest of the successor states, these five major states. It's socialistic. It's a socialistic police state with a strong Chinese and Russian influence. The Confederation is ruled by an authoritarian ruler named the Chancellor, who has almost always been a member of the house or family Liao. Liao has always, for one reason or another, been at a disadvantage or the underdog until much later when they become one of the strongest houses in the inner sphere. The Capelan Confederation lost a lot of territory to their aggressive, better equipped and trained neighbors early in its history, like Davian and others. Capelans tend to take pride in their civilization and view their lives and their efforts primarily being an all-out duty to the state. It is also of note that many consider the rulers of the Capelan Confederation to maybe not be 100% right in the head, like the cheese fell off the cracker, maybe a little bit, maybe possibly viewed as slightly crazy, as well as marriage and pairing within the family system was something of a thing. So, that's maybe led to some of the crazy too. Originally founded on Capella, its current capital world is Cian. They tend towards green colors for their military machines. Their symbol is a raised fist with a curved sword, generally with green tones. So if you're thinking scrappy underdog, maybe a bit crazy, and scrappy, and and maybe a little bit of treachery, you're probably on the right track to kind of understanding these guys. All right, the last major state that I want to talk to is House Merrick, or the Free Worlds League. The Free Worlds League is the oldest and the greatest of the great houses. And unlike the others, it's technically a federation of smaller states ruled by a democratic parliament rather than a single nation under one great house or great ruling family. So less monarchy, more federation of worlds, right? In truth, the League has usually been a de facto military dictatorship under the Captain Generals of House Merrick. Internal strife, mercantile, and industry power base have arisen, and sheer diversity of the League's member provinces have caused some fractiousness. And this faction, I think, is the least well documented in the Battletech universe. Some people seem to think that this is Space America, but I tend to differ. I tend to think of this as Austro-Hungarian and European in background. The America part might be because this faction seems to be splintered into many sub-factions that seem to be in a perpetual state of civil war. When the Free Worlds League as a whole is threatened, they lay down their clubs for long enough to pulp the outsiders. After they're left bleeding in the gutter, they pick up those clubs and knives again and once again go at each other's throats. So suffice it to say, this faction is typically known as the faction that is constantly under civil war, kind of internal squabbling to the extreme. The faction's crest is a bird outstretched in flight and is typically purple or purple background. And a lot of their mechs or their war equipment is typically got some shade of purple if it's not in a camouflage color, much like the other factions. They're typically associated with purple. The capital world of this faction is called Atreus. And if you think about this group, you think squabbling siblings who'd cut the first asshole who messed with their family, but then they'd go right back at trying to stab each other in the back. These guys are it. So maybe think of Sons of Anarchy without the banjos. So those are the five major houses. And one other thing I almost forgot. These, like I said, these are the five major houses. There's also a loose group of fringe states called the periphery, and this conversation would be remiss if we were not talking about them. I'm not going to go into tremendous detail on these guys, but think of these guys as kind of the fringes of normal civilization. They're considered backwater worlds with frontier justice, and they're home to vagabonds, hermits, zealots, anti-government wackos, and mercenaries looking to make a quick buck. There are too many minor states here to talk about, like Magistracy of Canopus and the Taurian Concordat, and so many others that you should go take a look at, and it's a fun rabbit hole to go down. But in terms of these guys, think of Mad Max with customized spiky mechs with maybe have a ball and chain and wild paint jobs, and you're kind of right there. Oh, and for those of you who might be claiming, but Greg, you forgot the coolest one of them all, I'm not going to forget Comstar. Not going to go into a whole lot of detail there. You can dive into the lore, but Comstar is super cool. Think of a super secretive almost cult-like communications group that manages all interstellar communications. They're a little bit weird and fringy. They have white battle mechs, and they spy on everybody, and that's kind of who they are. So Comstar, super cool, very mysterious. Check those guys out too. They are something that you should look into. You don't see a whole lot of Comstar on the table, and I think that's actually kind of a shame. But I would honestly take a look at those guys, and if that sounds kind of interesting to you, go take a look down that rabbit hole too. So those are the big factions. If you kind of like picking a faction based on like their identity, those are the big identities that are in the universe that you could go explore. The next section is the section that I like to call pick my color scheme over anything else, and I kind of lovingly call this, I like my color to be blue, or whatever color du jour you have. And so it's like I fall into this category. Sometimes I just want to paint a faction that's blue. Sometimes I like, I want to paint yellow battle mechs or what have you. So maybe you don't care if you're a Merc or a Great House. Maybe you don't care if your house's primary colors are red or normally red like Korita, but you do happen to want a red mech, or you want a white faction, or you want whatever color scheme that you're interested in painting. Maybe you just like that color scheme, and we can figure that one out too. So if you're thinking, man, I really like Housesteiner, but I want a red color scheme mech, and I've seen all the Housesteiner mechs I've seen so far that are blue, well, fear not. There's a couple ways you can actually do that too. So one is just make yourself a Housesteiner group that has red mechs. Done. Right? Just like a mercenary crew, there are thousands and thousands of different units within each great house that can have a custom color scheme that you define, just like a mercenary company, but hey, they're attached to a great house. No big deal. It can be a custom unit within a house. You can make that, no problem. No one's going to say no. It's all good. In addition to that, all of these factions also do have different color schemes. So like not all Korita mechs are red. Not all Steiner mechs are blue. You can go into a couple of different utilities or information sources out on the internet and sort of explore what the canonical color schemes of some of those units in each one of those factions are. So specifically, you can go into a couple of different places. So I'm going to walk you through a website called Unit Color Compendium. We're going to walk through something called Cammo Specs Online, and even Sarna might have some information or color pictures on different types of units and mechs, but really let's talk about the two big ones that I use are Unit Color Compendium and Cammo Specs Online. So let's just go over there and take a look at what they've got. Okay. So this is Unit Color Compendium, and so you can kind of see, just go to unitcolorcompendium.com. You can go search, but let's go look at the factions. Let's go Inner Sphere. You could say, oh, hey, hey man, that Free Worlds League that you were talking about with the purple mechs and the bird, man, I dig that. Let's go take a look at that. So you can go here, just say, it'll just take you to the category Free Worlds League. It's going to show you kind of all the canonical color schemes that are associated in the lore with that faction. So there's the Chaos Irregulars, Tamarind Irregulars 1st through 8th, Stuart Dragoons, Syrian Lancers. Hey, I like orange. Okay, hey, maybe that's cool. Or the Syrian Lancers. Ooh, Silverhawk Irregulars. I happen to do this one as my house Merrick faction. So, okay, let's look in here. It's going to show you all about what this mech looks like. It's going to give you some more information in half purple, half white. It'll give you some crests and some kind of high-level information. It'll give you a link to Sarna and all sorts of good stuff. So, you can do it this way, right? You can go in here. Hey, I like Merrick, or maybe, hey, I like this one, the Protectorate. What was that one? Protectorate Guard. I like that color scheme. Hey, maybe I'm going to try to recreate that on a mech. And you can go to Sarna to find out what that mech is all about, or not that what that faction is all about. So let's say instead of Merrick, let's say I like Comstar, right? So Comstar is pretty simple. All of their armies are typically painted white. So, that's going to give you some information. They've got different insignia. You can find these decals if you go to Fighting Piranha Graphics. You can put those on your mech, but it'll give you all sorts of stuff. And hey, look, here's, some links to Cammo Specs Online as well. So you know what? Let's just go there. So this, this should be pretty straightforward. Take a look at this. You're in the Inner Sphere. Whoops. Factions, Inner Sphere, Capelan Confederation. Hey, you like that? Go take a look at this. There are so many different designs that are canonical that, hey, I really like that. I'm going to try to do that. Take a look at this. Let's go back to that Comstar because it had a link to Cammo Specs. So Cammo Specs Online is another place you can go to kind of get some ideas or some inspirations for some color schemes. You can go here to factions. Yeah, there's so many. We're not even talking about clans just yet, but let's just say we're talking about Draconis Combine. Let's say we like the Draconis Combine. So just click there. House colors, and there's all these different units. You're going to be able to get to see all kinds of different color schemes. I have not looked at these, so I don't know if I'm clicking on something that makes a lot of sense or not. But they'll usually in here they're going to give you some decent pictures on mechs, or at least give you some information on how to go after them. So again, you can see someone painted up a dragon in this color scheme. And they'll also give you some information about the insignia. So if you're you want to make something that's within the lore and kind of replicate something, these two resources are really fantastic for you to kind of go take a look at what's available. So again, here's some color schemes that you can kind of take a look at. Okay, next up, next to the last category that I feel like we could talk about is gasp. Don't paint them at all. So I know this probably sounds a little bit like heresy, and I always love the mantra "play it painted." I may get some flack on this one, but you know what? I believe you should paint your mechs, right? It really helps with the immersion for both you and your opponent. Own your opponent's fun, and to me, that's part of it. But I will also say this: just play Battletech. It's such a great game. If that means you play it unpainted, then so be it. Today they're House Davian, tomorrow they're Eridani Lighthorse, next week they're Comstar, 2 years from now they're your periphery completely junked up mechs. All good. Big whoop. No big deal. Have fun. Play your way. If it's a question between playing and not playing, play unpainted, man, and just call them what you want. That's all I'm going to say about that. All right. The last category, and it's not really a category, but it's a maybe a pearl of wisdom, is that it's kind of like Pokemon, man. Got to collect them all. So you're thinking about a faction, you're going to paint up a bunch of mechs. So I don't necessarily want to assume anybody listening to this or is getting into Battletech is going to become a raging fanboy like myself. But one thing I have also noticed is that when people get into Battletech, they play it a little bit, and they really enjoy it, and they paint up a faction, and they start thinking, well, maybe I should have another faction. It's not like you're buying into a $500 or $2,000 army that, okay, well, I can only afford so much. The mechs are the mechs, and with the new Kickstarter, the Inner Sphere Lances are $20. That's 4 awesome sculpted mechs, and that's like a quarter of a faction right there, right? So realistically, you only need 4 mechs for a faction, right? But most people probably, maybe-ish, kind of go to 16, 24, or 36 mechs maybe to fill out a faction, maybe even more, to have some variety in their games, right? Then it hits you. It's like, okay, let's say I've got 36 mechs. That's quite a few mechs. That's a good, healthy number of mechs for a faction. You don't necessarily need more than that, but that you're gonna have a lot of variety with that. And then it hits you. It's like, I didn't spend all that much money on this, and I kind of want to paint some mechs in a different color scheme, or I want to paint some of those House Davian mechs because they look awesome. And at some point after you've collected them, a few mechs, like, okay, it's time to jump to another faction. And you kind of get hooked, and you want to paint more mechs. And then you see your buddy's mechs or your friend's mechs, and her mechs look awesome. And it's just an opportunity to explore a new faction, explore a new experience, and just kind of build your collection and play them, and just have fun painting mechs. and then maybe you start another one after that. But like the sky's the limit. But it's a lot cheaper than other miniature war games that you're going to get into because really you just don't really need that many machines, and so that kind of kills some of that angst of maybe picking the next faction because for me, this is the true fun of it. This is where I'm at today. It's like I'm excited because I've got a laundry list of factions that I want to paint and play, right? And I just want to create and enjoy them and have my friends enjoy them and and enjoy that hobby together. And to me, that's the juice. So I think in some respects you can really get by with just a small collection of mechs, and you can play this game for as long as you want with a small number of mechs. But I think you're going to find that once you start playing and painting, that you're going to want to get more and more mechs, and the fun is a lot of the fun is the collecting of the different mechs and the different factions. So that was a lot of information, man, and I'm sorry that was a little bit long-winded, but I kind of wanted to kind of explore the space with you. And veterans, what other things can you think of that I might not have hit? Did I miss anything? Did I get anything wrong? Critique the faction commentary if you want, but look, man, that's real high level. I don't think, maybe at some point I've been thinking about doing some lore videos, so maybe I'll go into more detail there. So please don't crucify me on that. But in summary, veterans, what other ideas can you give those coming new into Battletech on how to pick a faction? What are things that I missed? What things do you want to expand upon? Put those comments in there. They're super helpful. People read those, and I read those, and I really get a kick out of what you all say. So to me, picking a faction in Battletech is awesome. It's so ripe with opportunity to pick and explore, and I hope you have found these sort of discussions super useful. If you have any other ideas, like I said, please feel free to drop a comment. Also, let me know if you like this kind of content and want to see more of this, and see if I can dream up of more other topics similar to this that you'd like to hear. Let me know, and I'll see if I can put that in my backlog of things to make a conversation about. So hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoy picking your next Battletech faction, and happy Battleteching.